Pick one token inside this network. At every layer, that token is represented by a vector, hundreds or thousands of activation values. We need one number that summarizes their overall magnitude. We will use the root mean square, or RMS. Intuitively, RMS is the typical distance of those activation values from zero. The longer this meter, the larger that RMS. Now consider a deliberately simple residual block example. A residual block keeps the incoming vector and adds an update. Suppose, just for this example, the update points in the same direction as the incoming vector and is half as long. The output is then 1.5 times as long, so its RMS is also multiplied by 1.5. Real blocks do not all use this fixed multiplier. The aligned case simply makes the danger easy to see. Repeat that modest increase 5 times and the RMS grows from 1 to about 7.6. No individual update looked enormous. Repeated multiplication across depth created the runaway activation magnitude. Training sends a gradient back through the same stack, but not by replaying that forward multiplier. At each block, the gradient is transformed by that block's local sensitivity, called its Jacobian. One block can stretch the gradient in some directions, another can shrink it. Multiply many of those transformations together, and different layers can receive very different gradient norms. With the same learning rate, a small gradient barely changes its weights, while a large gradient can take an unstable step. The problem is not that every gradient grows. The problem is that the backward path is poorly conditioned. At each normalization point, the model measures an activation vector and rescales it to a predictable magnitude. The feature pattern is still there. The overall magnitude is controlled before it can drift too far. That also changes the backward Jacobians, making the optimization problem better conditioned rather than forcing every gradient to be identical. That operation is normalization. The real question is, how does rescaling activations reshape optimization? So why does that thin layer help so much? For years, the textbook answer was internal covariate shift. The idea was that as the network trains, the distribution of each layer's inputs keeps drifting, and normalization pins those distributions in place, so the layers above aren't chasing a moving target. It's a clean story. It's also, as far as the evidence goes, the wrong one. In 2018, a group at MIT put it to the test. They deliberately added noise back into the activations after normalizing, reintroducing exactly the shift the theory said was harmful. The networks trained just fine. The distributional stability wasn't where the benefit was coming from. What normalization actually does is reshape the optimization landscape. It makes the loss surface smoother. On a jagged surface, the gradient points in a direction that's only good for a tiny step. Take a big one and you overshoot into a wall. Smooth that surface out and the gradient becomes reliable. It keeps pointing downhill for longer, so you can safely turn the learning rate up and move faster. That's the spine of this whole video. Normalization smooths the loss landscape so you can descend it, not matching distributions, controlling scale so the surface stays descendable. Every variant we will look at is just a different answer to one question. How much of the signal scale do we control and where? Let's look at the standard tool for the job, LayerNorm. Take one token's vector and walk it through 4 steps. First, subtract the mean so the values are centered on 0. Then divide by the standard deviation so the spread is pulled to 1. Those 2 steps do the real work. After that, 2 learnable knobs, a scale, gamma, and a shift, beta, that let the network undo or retune the normalization if it wants to. Now the important part isn't the arithmetic, it's the axis. LayerNorm computes those statistics across the features of a single token. Compare that to BatchNorm, which normalizes the same feature down the batch, across many different sequences at once. That difference is everything for transformers. BatchNorm ties each token's normalization to whatever else happens to be in the batch, and it gets awkward the moment your sequences have different lengths. LayerNorm depends on nothing but the token itself. It's batch independent, and that independence is exactly why transformers standardized on it. Here's where the subtraction arc begins. Look back at those 4 steps and ask, do we need all of them? RMSNorm says no. Cross out the mean centering, cross out the beta shift. What's left is just the rescaling, divide by the root mean square, then scale. It turns out the recentering was mostly along for the ride. The rescaling was doing the work, and dropping the rest matches LayerNorm's quality, sometimes even nudges it up. But quality isn't why anyone bothered. The real reason is speed, and not the kind you'd guess. Normalization is a rounding error in the flops. The matmls are basically all of the math, yet it eats a surprisingly large slice of wall clock time because it's memory bandwidth bound, not compute bound. It's constantly reading and writing activations, not crunching numbers. Compute fewer statistics, touch less memory, and you claw back real time. The original paper reported anywhere from 7 to 64%, depending on the setup, but repeated twice a layer, hundreds of layers deep, across trillions of tokens, it adds up. Which is why RMSNorm is now the default in Qwen, DeepSeek, Gemma, and most everything else. So far, we've only talked about what the norm is. Now the second, completely separate question. Where does it go? This is a different axis entirely, and conflating the two is the single most common confusion about normalization. The original transformer put the norm after the residual add. You take the input, add the sublayer's output, and normalize the sum. This keeps the activations bounded, which is good, but it has a nasty side effect at initialization. The gradients near the output layers come out large, and if you set a normal learning rate, training diverges almost immediately. The historical patch was learning rate warmup. Start the learning rate near zero and ramp it up slowly over thousands of steps, tiptoeing past the unstable early phase. It works, but nobody loved it. It's a fragile knob you have to tune, and it's a sign that the placement itself is fighting you. The fix is simple. Move the norm. Instead of normalizing after the add, normalize the input on the way into the sublayer and leave the residual path itself untouched. This is pre-norm. Now the gradients are well behaved at initialization across the whole depth, warm-up becomes optional, and very deep stacks just train. This became the default, GPT, Llama, the vision transformers, almost everyone. But pre-norm has a hidden cost. Because the residual stream is never normalized, its magnitude grows as you go up the stack. Every sublayer dumps its output straight onto that highway, and nothing rescales it. In a shallow model, you don't notice. In a very deep, very large one, that growth comes back as instability, the opposite failure mode from post-norm. So the field is now walking partway back. The current move is Peri-Norm, also called sandwich or double norm, where you normalize both the input and the output of each sublayer. You can see it in the frontier. Gemma 2 and 3 normalize on both sides. Grok runs a double norm. The pendulum is swinging back toward more discipline on that residual stream. And notice the through line. The thing we're moving is still just a norm. The operator and the placement are independent choices. You can put RMSNorm anywhere, and where you put it matters as much as what it is. Peri-Norm isn't proven universally best. It costs you a second norm, but it's the correction the field is converging toward. There's one signal in the network that misbehaves worse than any other, the attention logits. Zoom into a single head. As training goes on, the norms of the query and key vectors slowly creep upward. Their dot product, the raw attention scores, grows with them. And once those scores get large, the softmax saturates. Instead of spreading attention smoothly across the context, it spikes onto a single token. The attention distribution collapses to nearly one hot, and its entropy drains toward zero. It gets worse in low precision. Push those logits high enough and they blow past the range that a 16-bit float can even represent, and you get nans, and the run dies. If this looks familiar, it should. We saw this exact failure in the Muon video, the Logit explosion that Muon clip was built to stop. The question now is whether there's a cleaner cure that attacks it from the other side. The cure is to normalize the query and key vectors before you ever multiply them. Drop a small RMSNorm onto the Q path and the K path right before the dot product. Now their magnitudes are bounded by construction, so the logits can't run away. Watch the gauge fall back under the red line, the softmax relax, and the entropy recover. That's QK norm. Put it next to Muon clip and you see two cures for one disease. QK norm normalizes the activations every single step proactively. Muon clip, or QK clip, leaves the activations alone, and instead clips the weights reactively whenever the logits cross a threshold. Same problem, two mechanisms. Neither one wins outright, and they are not the same thing, so don't blur them together. There's also a reason you can't always reach for QK-norm. It needs the full query and key vectors materialized to normalize them. But multi-head latent attention, the attention DeepSeek uses, deliberately avoids materializing them to save memory. So MLA models can't drop in QK-norm, and that's part of why clip-style fixes exist at all. The QK-norm variant puts the least attention mass on the needle token and underperforms on Needle-in-a-Haystack retrieval. That's a specific finding from specific work. Not a universal law, but it's the honest trade-off. Stability can blunt sharp recall. Even with that caveat, QK-norm is now standard in OMO2, Gemma, and Qwen 3. We've dropped the mean, moved the gate, and targeted the worst signal. Here's the most radical subtraction of all. What if we drop the statistics entirely? Take a trained LayerNorm and plot what it actually does, input on one axis, output on the other. The shape that comes out is an S-curve. It squashes the extreme values and stays nearly linear in the middle. So the question becomes, if the learned behavior is just a smooth squashing curve, do we need the mean and variance machinery to produce it? Dynamic Tanh says no. Replace the whole normalization block with a single operation. Scale the input by a learnable number, then apply the usual gamma and beta. No mean, no variance, no statistics across the feature dimension at all, just a scaled, bounded squash. And as a drop-in, it matches normalized models across vision transformers, diffusion models, and LLM scale language models, mostly without any extra tuning. Step back and the whole video is one subtraction arc. Drop the centering and you get RMSNorm. Move and then duplicate the gate and you get the post, pre, and peri placements. Target the worst behaved signal and you get QK-norm. Drop the statistics altogether and you get dynamic Tanh. 4 techniques, 1 question. How much of the signal's scale do we control and where? That was always the job, not matching distributions but shaping a smoother loss landscape. The same pipe that ran away at the start is now held calmly in band. Where does that leave us? A common stack is RMSNorm before or around residual blocks, plus QK-norm inside attention when the architecture allows it. But the stack is not the lesson. Ask 3 questions. Which signal's magnitude is drifting? Where should it be controlled? And how much control does the architecture need? Normalization is not bookkeeping. It shapes the geometry the optimizer sees, so signals survive depth and gradients can still lead downhill. If you found this helpful, please subscribe.